Rabbi, Friedman. Thank God it's Tuesday. Always looking forward to this moment, looking forward to get inspired and get some relief from the tension that we're experiencing these days. So I figured we had such a great start last week about speaking about how our today current events really reflect what we're reading in the Torah portions of last week and this week. And let me be entertaining for a little bit. I actually drew a parallel of the plagues of what they were and how I see them today in our reality. So here's the parallels I'm drawing. So turning water into blood, I would say is COVID. Frogs, I would say it's the media, because the frogs jumped into people's throats and made lots of noise. Lice is social media. It gets everywhere and gets to everyone. Wild animals are protests and riots that even domesticated animals became violent. So that kind of draws a parallel for me. Death of livestock is economy. Boils, revelation of evil. Thunderstorm of hail and fire, lies. Locust, I would say military. Darkness, censorship. Death of the firstborn remains to be seen. So this is where I stand in analyzing of what we're reading in the Torah and what is happening in the world today. That's only me, and I'm a spectator and a speculator. You're the expert.
Well, the blood, if you're comparing it to Corona, it's blood turning into water, not water turning into blood. Well, if this is in fact the 10 plagues, then we should be expecting some very good news. 10 plagues brings good results. Very good results. So it's really interesting. The plague of darkness. We don't understand. The plague was that during the day, it was as dark as night. But at night, it got darker. So there was still a difference between day and night. Day was dark and night was darker. But if it was so dark that people couldn't move, how much darker can dark get? So I was thinking that darkness is when you don't see where to go. So you can't move. Darker is when you don't even know where to go. So even if you could see, you wouldn't know where to go. So the darkness was definitely more than just physical. It was also spiritual darkness or mental darkness. So the way it's described is that the darkness was intense, so people didn't recognize their friends. They couldn't recognize each other. And then it got even darker. They couldn't get up or sit down. They were just frozen into whatever position they were in. And that's called catatonic. When you're sitting and you can't do anything other. Or if you're standing and you can't change, you can't move from one condition to another because you just don't see the way. So there are people sitting in hospitals who are catatonic. They can't move because they don't see the direction or the the opportunity. So they are frozen into where they are because they can't even think of what else to do. Now that's double darkness. Dark as night and then darker at night. And the Rebbe often referred to the exile, to the gullus that we're in, as a double darkness. The Rebbe explained it that we are in exile. We're not where we ought to be. That's one darkness. The second darkness is we don't realize that we are not where we ought to be. That's like a person who is seriously ill, but he doesn't know it. So not knowing it makes the illness 10 times more serious. And that's why what we need to do today, right now, more than anything, is to see clearly. To know which way is up, which way leads to the promised land, and what's down and bad. We really need to know. And it's good to know.
It's very good to know. Rabbi Friedman, actually, we had one message from a lady who said that this is exactly what is happening in their home, that her husband is so consumed by everything that is going on that he stopped being who he is, that he no longer jokes, smiles, he is overwhelmed by everything that is happening around, and he is not much fun to be around anymore. So she's actually asking for advice of what can she do to possibly change the situation in their home, or
we have to stop the panic. The fear is worse than the disease. Yeah, there is no reason to panic, and there's nothing good that comes from panicking. Let me share a really heavy subject or thought. One of the innovations, one of the original insights of the Baal Shem Tov was that God didn't create the world a long time ago and then went to do other things. God is creating the world constantly. Constantly. It's like every millisecond the world stops existing and God creates it again. So it's an ongoing process. And there's a good explanation for that. The explanation is that when a potter makes a pot out of clay or marble, once he's finished, he can let go and walk away, and the pot will remain. It'll keep its shape without any more help from the potter. But that's because he was working with some material, either with the clay or with the marble. Now, marble has the potential within its nature to maintain any kind of shape. So what the potter does is simply give the piece of marble or the clay one of the many forms or shapes that this material is capable of. And the proof is that no matter how good the potter is, he cannot make a pot out of water. Why can't he give water the shape of a pot and then it'll last, it'll hold? Because that potential does not exist in the water. In other words, the potter can't create anything new. He has to work with material that already exists. And in that material, he can only do what the material is capable of by its nature. He can't introduce a new nature. So he can't make the marble. He can't make the marble melt or flow, and he can't make water into a pot. So although we call it a creation, when an artist or an artisan produces a work of art, we call it a creation. But of course, it's not. It's simply manipulating the material according to what the material allows. It's like that joke about the atheist who says to God, we used to need you because we were primitive, but now we're very sophisticated. We don't need you anymore. We can do whatever you do. So God says, can you make a man out of dust? Out of sand? He says, yes, yeah, we have the technology. So God says, go ahead. Let me see. So he starts collecting some dust or some sand. And God says, no. You can't use my sand. In other words, even if we could make a man out of dust, we would have to use the dust that already exists, that God created. And then we have to hope that the dust has that potential in it, because if it doesn't, we can't produce it. So a human being can't create something out of nothing. But God created the world out of nothing. Therefore, he has to be creating it every second. Because if you can't teach water how to be a pot, you certainly can't teach nothing how to exist. So if you make nothing exist, it's all you. The nothing doesn't contribute at all. So you're the creator, you make it exist. Well, you have to keep making it exist because there's no one there to teach. So you can't teach nothing to exist, to have a shape or a form. So God is creating the world constantly. But it is so quick that we don't notice the break. Like when a movie is running, you don't notice that there's a blank black spot or stripe between each frame. If you were to slow it down, then you would see that it's individual frames. So you have a picture and then nothing and another picture and then nothing and another picture. So that's how existence works. The universe is like a pulse. It beats. It stops for a second and beats. It stops, and in other words, it stops existing and comes back into existence because God is saying, let there be. But he's saying it constantly. So you see it everywhere in the world. The universe is pulsating. A human being breathes in, out, night, day. So it's constantly going from no to yes, from yes to no. And that's what gives it its energy, its electricity. Now, if we were to understand this properly, the entire universe, everything we know and much more than we know, cannot exist for a second without being created. That's why we say that the existence of the world is not true. Not because there's no world. There is a world. but it's not its existence. It doesn't have its own existence. Like, for example, if you throw a stone into the air, it will move, it'll travel for a short time, and then it'll fall back to the earth. Why? Most people say because gravity. But the question really is a little different. When you throw the rock, you have broken the hold of gravity. You pick up the rock and you throw it against gravity, and it flies against gravity. Why does it stop? Why doesn't it continue flying? It's because a stone can't fly. And even when you force it to fly by throwing it, as long as your force carries it, it will move. When the force ends, weakens, the rock can't fly, so it falls back down. So no matter how many times you throw the rock, it does not learn to fly. So by definition, if a rock comes flying through your window, would you say, wow, what a unique rock, a flying rock? No, you wouldn't think that for a second. You would immediately run to the window and see who threw the rock, because rocks don't fly. So while the rock is flying, well, how would you describe it? It was a flying rock for a minute? No, not even for a minute. The rock never flew, because rocks don't fly. So how do you describe it? The rock was flown through your window. It didn't fly, it was flown. It was carried through the air by the force of your throw. So it would be wrong to say the rock flew for a minute. No, it didn't. The same is true with the universe. To say the universe exists, it may not exist forever, but right now it exists. Not correct. It does not exist, like a stone does not fly. The universe is being existed. It's being existed. It's being caused to exist. Something makes it exist. It does not. And that's why miracles are possible. Because every minute the world is new, so there are no fixed laws of nature. Anytime God wants to make a change, he makes a change. Anytime a holy person, a tzaddik, demands a change, nature changes. What that does for people, when that's clear in your mind, is that you're not intimidated by nature. A human being should be a little above, a little beyond and free of the limits of nature. After all, a human being is the highest level of existence. He shouldn't be a slave to the lower elements of existence. So a doctor should never say to a patient, this is what you have is terminal, it's fatal, and you have maybe a month or 2 months or whatever it is left. A doctor may not ever say that. What a doctor should say is, I can't do anything more. Medicine is limited, and it doesn't have a solution for your illness. So it's up to God. You might live, you might not. I can't predict it. I'm just saying, medicine, can't do anything more. But to say, therefore, you're going to pass away, doctor has no right to say that. In fact, it could be very dangerous and damaging when a doctor, with the authority of a doctor, says you have a month to live. That almost creates its own reality. The person gives up on life. So we can't be overly intimidated by nature. We can't ignore it either, because this is how God wants the world to function. But it's not the world that dictates, it's God. So if you want something different from the world, don't talk to the world. Like people say, the universe will give you what you ask for. Don't talk to the universe. It's not listening. Talk to God, the creator of the universe, creator in present tense. Right now, he is creating you. Which really leads us to two amazing conclusions. The first is, why does God create a world that needs to be created all the time? Certainly God is capable, and he could have made a world that doesn't need to be created all the time. We wouldn't understand how that works. How can you teach nothing to exist on its own? Well, we don't understand how you can make nothing exist, even with your help. So it would be another mystery. But God would be free from having to create the world every second. So we realize, yes, he could have done it that way. He prefers this way. He prefers to be committed, involved, engaged, creating us all the time. It's his pleasure. It gives us the opportunity to connect to him. If he wasn't creating us right now, how would we find him? Where would he be? We wouldn't know. But now we know he is engaged actively in creating you at this very second. And why? Because he wants to create you every second. He likes you. The other amazing thing we realize, if he is creating me at this very moment, why don't I feel it? Why don't I sense it? Why don't I see it? Why don't I act accordingly? And why doesn't it affect me? So if God created the world a long time ago and I ignore him and I forget about him, that makes perfect sense. He hasn't been here in a long time. So true that many, many years ago he created us. But I don't have to be thinking about that all the time. So I forget about him. But if he is creating me right now, he is actively engaged in my existence, why don't I feel it? Why can I forget him or not recognize him or ignore him? Which leads us to another amazing conclusion. As much as God loves us and wants to be creating us all the time, he doesn't want to impose. He doesn't force himself into our awareness. I will create you all the time, consistently, with real, total, eternal, infinite commitment. But you can choose to notice me or not. You can choose to respond to what I'm giving you and be grateful or not. He's not going to force it. He gives us freedom of choice. How? By not making himself obvious even while he is creating us out of nothing. See, this changes everything. The Baal Shem Tov literally reinvented Judaism. We used to think God is very demanding and we have to obey his demands. That's it. That's the whole story. He's the boss. We don't get to say anything. We don't deserve an opinion. We're not entitled to an opinion. So just be quiet and do whatever God says. The Baal Shem Tov came along and said, this is not arbitrary. It's not because he's the boss. This is the reality. The universe doesn't exist of it by itself. It doesn't have its own reality. The entire reality of the universe is that God is creating it for his purpose. And therefore, we are his partners, not his victims. It's not, I created you, I'm your boss, you do what I say. That's not a very pleasant picture. The way the Baal Shem Tov describes it, it's a whole new world. But in this whole new world, we know that we need not be intimidated by the universe, by the laws of nature, by natural events and occurrences. Don't be impressed. This is all God doing what he needs to do to make the world perfect. So what are we panicking about?
Maybe free will of other people. I said maybe we're panicking about the free will that some people choose to utilize differently.
Yes. I'm not afraid of God. I know God knows what he's doing, but everybody else I'm afraid of. If God is creating us and the universe, he is not going to let it be destroyed or ruined or even derailed. The world is moving along according to his plan. And it's not possible, according to what we just described, it's not possible that God oversees some detail or forgets or doesn't notice. He's creating it. How can he not know what the world is like when he is creating it every second? So you see, divine providence and creation are the same thing. Why does God notice everything? Why does God pay attention to everything? Because he's creating it at this very moment. How can he not?
Can I just go to Torah and to our particular parsha regarding this, what we're discussing right now? So when God created the plagues, he also played with Pharaoh's heart. Sometimes it was Pharaoh's choice to say no, and sometimes it was God's choice to say no by hardening his heart. We read very precisely about it. how does that come into play in our day-to-day life now?
The heart of every leader is in God's hand, which means to say, God gives people a certain authority, God gives people a certain influence over others, and they become leaders. But they're leaders over others. They have no power to change God's plan. The first two plagues, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to let them go. After the other plagues, God hardened his heart. But that doesn't seem right. If God is hardening his heart, why is he punishing him for that? The hardening of the heart was not what made him evil. The hardening of the heart was the ability to tolerate the plague, to not be overwhelmed and impressed by the plague. So the first two plagues, he wasn't overwhelmed, even without God hardening his heart, because the astrologers and the magicians were able to turn water into blood also. So he wasn't so impressed. And they could bring frogs too. But after that, the plagues were beyond. That would have impressed Pare and forced him to let the Jews go. God didn't want him to let the Jews go because of a plague. He wanted Pharaoh to let the Jews go because it was the right thing to do. So the hardening of the heart was, don't be impressed by the plague, consider what you're doing. You're playing God, you don't want to obey God. Eventually, it was effective. After the 8th plague, I think, Pharaoh called Moshe and said, "You're right and I'm wrong. God is right and I am wrong." It was the beginning of a change in belief, in thinking, in understanding. That's what God wanted. So if you remember, when Pharaoh does send the Jews out, he's very specific. He says, "Please leave now, go serve God." It's not just get out, I don't want to die. So that's why there had to be 10 plagues, not just one big one, because that certainly would have intimidated Pharaoh rather than enlighten him. And that's also what the hardening of the heart was. So sometimes the behavior of leaders is a little shocking. Like, why would any intelligent leader behave in a way that makes everybody hate him? How do you get cooperation from people who hate you? So you have to kill them all out. It's not that they're bloodthirsty and they just love killing. They're intelligent people, and maybe someplace deep down in their hearts, they wish they could be nicer, but God is hardening their heart. And if God is hardening their heart, it's all for not only the benefit of others, but it's even for the benefit of that leader, like in the case of Pharaoh.
Rabbi Friedman, another thing that we're reading in this parsha is that there is actually a civil war happening. The Roman people are the ones, I believe it's in tomorrow's portion, where the Egyptians are actually coming to the Pharaoh and asking him to please, that it's enough, and there's I don't want to call it a riot, but a protest where the Egyptian people are asking the Pharaoh to please, enough already. So how do we draw that parallel as far as what is happening? Where also people became very active and activated in lately.
Yeah. So in Egypt, it was a war. The firstborn and the highly educated went to war against Pharaoh because they realized what was going on before Pharaoh did. Back in those days, the only way to settle anything was with a war, with weapons. Today, we don't have to have weapons. We can have a revolution without weapons. And you see that the evil doesn't need weapons anymore. Just come up with an evil scheme and make a plan and bribe and threaten, and all of a sudden you have a real crusade going. So in response to that, we don't need weapons. We just need a better plan. But a revolution is certainly coming. A good revolution. But that means we've never seen a good revolution. But now it's going to happen.
So it is up to the
And we
people.
don't have to wait until Pesach.
Well, that's good news, because another scary thing is, everything is happening right now, again, in our lives as well as in the Torah, as far as the Exodus out of Egypt. But then after everything is all good, there's still 40 years of wandering in the desert. And this is the scary part. So, it seems like the moment of truth is almost here, but will we have to, again, do soul searching for another unexplained period of time until we shed all the negativity that has piled up as of recent?
It may take some time, but it's good time. Like the 40 years in the desert were very good years. Mm. It doesn't sound that way when you read the Torah. It sounds like Jews were complaining constantly and there was one problem after another. But when you count it, there were 10 times that Jews were upset. 10 times in 40 years? That's not so bad. Imagine a marriage. In 40 years, they had 10 arguments.
I'll take it.
I'll take it. And the arguments were even good arguments, So, yeah, if the re-education of the world will take 40 years, that'll be good. They'll be good 40 years. So, whatever it takes, let's just get started. Sorry about the lighting.
I think it's a little bit mysterious. You're fading in and out a little bit, as we speak about the darkness. Rabbi Friedman.
Special effects.
Yeah. So it seems like almost here, almost now, almost, we're at that almost true point. And I don't know if it's just me, but I'm kind of in anticipation of something to happen somewhere around now. Is that a true feeling or a wishful thinking feeling?
Oh, it's good. It's good. Look, we're dealing with something much bigger than a local American problem. It's global. The whole world, not just America. So to, unravel and reestablish a healthy world, okay, that can take a couple of days. But there's got to be a solution to Syria. There's got to be a solution to Iran. There's got to be a solution to Turkey. There's a lot of stuff to fix in this world.
But that's not new. That's been going
on.
No,
but now the fixing, which is underway, is just full of surprises.
In your own words, I'm still waiting. You said, prepare for a surprise, and it's going to be a good one. We've been surprised a few times already, but I can't really say they were grand. So those were the false ones, I hope. The false surprises.
Yeah. The surprise is going to be how arrogant the evil can be, which means it's dying. And the other surprise is how real goodness can be. Pure goodness, altruism, no ulterior motives, just the real thing. We haven't seen that in a long time. So yes, there'll be two good surprises. One is how evil dies of its own doing, at its own hands. And the other is how powerful goodness really is.
Rabbi Friedman, I don't think there's any more we can say for today. This is awesome. Hopefully it is something that we will see very, very soon, because that's also the very, very hard time. It feels like it's almost here, almost now. Things are happening, but there's no conclusion just yet. There's no that grand finale that we're waiting for. That's actually going to be a great beginning, but it feels like it's very near, and so many people are feeling it. But that anxiety is, when is it going to happen?
Don't give up the ship. Stay positive, stay optimistic. That actually even helps make the world better. It's not just hopeful.
Well, it certainly has
a contribution.
It certainly has been my mantra since you have voiced it here on RSA. Be positive, be optimistic, be kind. I wake up with that, and I pretty much carry out the day with that. And thank you very, very much for planting that very, very important thought and idea and passing it on to our community, as you do every week.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Friedman, for everything God It's Tuesday that we're able to spend with you.